Vaticano this week, in addition to the general audience, we follow some of the people who spend Christmas closest to Pope Benedict XVI, the pontifical preacher, the cardinal head of St. Peter's Basilica, and his Master of Ceremonies all chip in. The Sistine Chapel Choir also contributes a hymn for the Christmas season. All this next on Vaticano.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pax vobis. Et cum spiritu tuo.
As Christmas approached, Pope Benedict XVI met with these thousands of faithful and pilgrims at Paul VI Hall for the general audience. There he continued his catechesis on prayer, calling for trust in God's will.
Dear brothers and sisters, in our continuing catechesis on prayer, we now consider Jesus' own prayer, particularly in the context of his miracles of healing. Both the cure of the deaf man and the raising of Lazarus show us Jesus at prayer before cases of human suffering. His prayer on these occasions reveals not only his profound identification with the suffering, but also his unique relationship with the Father. In the case of the deaf man, Jesus' compassion leads him to introduce his prayer with a deep sigh. In the case of Lazarus, he is deeply moved by the sorrow of Martha and Mary and weeps before the tomb of his friend. At the same time, he sees the tragedy of Lazarus' death in the light of the Father's will and of his own identity and mission. Jesus' example teaches us that in our own prayers we must always trust in the Father's will and strive to see all things in the light of his mysterious plan of love. We too must join petition, praise, and thanksgiving in every prayer, knowing that the greatest gift God can give us is his friendship, and that our example of prayer can open our hearts to our brothers and sisters in need and point others to God's saving presence in our world.
Whether at the Vatican or anywhere else on earth, Christmas is upon us. It's a time to prepare for Christ's coming. And every year during Advent, this Italian Capuchin priest prepares the Pope and those closest to him for Christmas with a series of meditations.
It's a very simple ministry because the Pope at that moment is just a listener among other listeners. In fact, it's the Pope who gives the sermon to the rest of the church by listening to the meditation of a very simple priest of the Catholic Church. I have been doing that for the last 32 years. I started with John Paul II in 1980, and Benedict confirmed me. By the way, as Cardinal Ratzinger was always in the first row, and preaching while the prefect of the Congregation of Faith is in front of you is quite challenging, I assure you. But as I know that I am not supposed to give my philosophical system, but the message of the gospel, and I am fully convinced that the message of the gospel deserves to be heard. So this makes things easier. You know what this job consists in. I give a meditation every Friday in Lent and Advent, in 2 seasons, to the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, prelates of the Roman Curia, and some lay people, even some women, who were allowed to come by John Paul II. As a result of his letter, Mulieris Dignitatem, on the dignity of the women.
All of his Lenten and Advent meditations can be found on his website in a number of languages, and that includes those from this year.
My program this Advent is to try to present 4 moments in the history of the Church, which I call the great waves of a new evangelization. The first one in the first centuries, the second after the fall of the Roman Empire, and the third when the New World was discovered, America. So there was a complete new field of evangelization. And the present one, where the target is more the secularized Western world than the usual mission country. And in the past, the role for evangelization, in the evangelization, was more entrusted to bishops, pastors, monks, religious people. Nowadays, after the council, the lay have taken their big role in evangelization. I am convinced that at present, lay people are in the front row, in the forefront in the evangelization. They do really evangelization on the field, going in the street and preaching to people in a person-to-person basis. So it's very important that the Christian faith spread at the beginning, especially through personal encounters. There were no specialized official missionaries. Every Christian was a missionary. According to the circumstances, maybe people who shared the same work, same job, or were in the military service, or for commercial purposes got in touch, were evangelization. And these forms of evangelization are very relevant nowadays too. Lay people usually cannot do what I do, preaching to crowds, to the clergy, but they meet people in the everyday life, and they can meet people whom we cannot reach, and invite them and transmit to them with gentleness, as Peter, our reasons for hope.
So, with Christmas upon us, what does the Pope's preacher hope for the world?
A renewed surge of faith. There have been always, throughout the Bible and even throughout the history of the Church, moment of a leap in quality. What determines, what causes this leap in quality are several reasons. Maybe nowadays, precisely the difficult times we are living in, the scandals, and can be an occasion for a leap in quality, which means that relying more on Jesus than on ourselves, focusing on Jesus, the dear Redeemer, we can make this problem, this big problem, even this defeat, a victory. Only faith in Jesus can change every defeat in a victory. I am fully convinced of that. And the miracle of Christmas is that Jesus, God, achieves great goals through very small means. The contrary of men, when men want to do something colossal, like sending people to the moon, they need to great apparatus. God achieves great results with small things. A baby.
Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
Here, in one of the largest squares of Rome, is the Basilica of Santa Maria del Popolo, where an annual collection of nativity scenes, both live and handmade varieties, are on display. The ceremony was led by children during Advent. Kids in traditional dress, representing every region of Italy, took part, while a living nativity scene kept watch and tried to keep still. Enjoying the scene was this Vatican representative, a big proponent of the Nativity Scene.
For us Catholics, the Nativity Scene is the greatest and most unthinkable photograph. God made man to give us the human characteristics we had lost due to the infection of sin, pride, and egoism. Thanks to the fact that God was made man, it's possible to become like St. Francis of Assisi, St. Therese of Lisieux, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or John Paul II. Christmas is the reason behind this new humanity, and for that reason, it and the nativity scene that depicts it are for us the very same image of optimism.
Per me è una sorgente di fiducia.
For me, it is a source of trust to look at the nativity scene. And I think that the world might be like that squalid grotto, but when God is born, that smelly stable turns into the grotto of Bethlehem, the brightest point in history. In a special way for me, the nativity scene is a memory of a happy childhood. We had this tradition after midnight mass, once we had arrived at home, whereby my mother would put the Virgin in the grotto, and my father, who was a carpenter, would put St. Joseph in place, while my sister and I inserted the baby Jesus. I still remember that scene with great nostalgia. That's why every time I see a nativity scene, it's like becoming a child again, going back to the innocence and interior transparency of childhood.
These children were building their own memories, with 100 scenes to take in. Some of the depictions took a more classical approach to presenting Christ's birth. Others were very elaborate, or made use of everyday materials. There were African and Asian themes. Lights flashed, water flowed, and parts moved. Guards kept watch, while parents looked to unlock construction secrets. The variety kept visitors entertained, and this cardinal enamored.
Nella mia casa il presepe è quello tradizionale.
In my house, there is a traditional nativity scene that depicts St. Luke's story of Christ's birth. I really appreciate it, and it has a great significance. Jesus is made poor so as to say no to wealth as a source of happiness, because it's not really that way. He becomes humble to respond to pride as a dimension of greatness. It's not true that the proud are great. He becomes small to contest violence as an instrument to change history. It is not violence that changes history. Poverty, humility, and making oneself small is the great lesson of Christmas, and with that lesson, I'm very happy indeed.
He went so far as to compose a special prayer dedicated to the Nativity.
I've composed a number of prayers, actually, because at Christmas I feel very much in harmony with my spirituality. But there's one that I particularly like, and I'd like to read it. The title is, O Poor One of Bethlehem. Lord, while time achieves all hopes, you continue to be our only hope. While centuries and also millennia are consumed, you continue to be ever young, and you conserve the freshness of a flower and of a bubbling spring. Lord, words are dishonored and tired, but within us remains a flame of hope. The unstoppable necessity for light emerges. Hope in something, or better put, someone, blossoms again. You, O poor one of Bethlehem, you are the answer that we often don't hear. You, O poor one of Bethlehem, are the wealth that we don't often understand. You, O poor one of Bethlehem, are the peace that we are seriously lacking. Lord, born in Bethlehem, the city of our poverty and smallness, we take shelter in Mary to look at you with her gaze and love you with her heart. That is the hope that no one will ever be able to take from us.
The question, who is that man beside the Pope at Mass, may have occurred to you once or twice as you follow Pope Benedict XVI's motions by television. Actually, he's been the Pope's Master of Ceremonies since 2007.
It so happened that during a summer course I received a phone call from the Secretary of State who explained the Holy Father's wish to have me here to carry out this task. During the summer, things evolved, and in October my appointment came. The 15th of October I arrived here, and I began my position little by little.
He guides the Pope through celebrations, making sure that everything's in order and that the Pontiff is in the right place at the right time. So what is it like to be there beside the leader of the world's Catholics as he celebrates the sacrifice of the Mass or travels to Africa?
What do I think during those moments? It might be a bit hard to explain. I can say that I interpret my role, which is also that of being a priest, and it's also a sign of a link that is undoubtedly of faith, but also one of affection for the person of the Holy Father as the Vicar of Christ, the successor of Peter. From that perspective, I feel that I must do all I can to help the Pope, sometimes even from a simple material point of view, very concrete assistance. There is where I carry out my task as is necessary, and I try to do it delicately and attentively. So in those moments I think, I'm beside the Vicar of Christ, renewing my faith, carrying out acts of simple attention. I try to express that link which is spiritual and human at the same time.
The close contact has given him a good idea of how it is that the Pope celebrates the Mass.
It seems to me that the Pope, as a theologian, takes the liturgy as a source, something fundamental and important. He is very attentive not to lose sight of the liturgy as it develops, as the celebration of the mystery of Christ, where the Lord is the true great protagonist and where he authentically enters into the gospel of Christ. Also, there are many small yet large things that from the liturgical side it is necessary to consider, so that the centrality of the presence of the Lord, as the protagonist, remains well affirmed. Also in the true sense of participation in the mystery of Christ. There are some things in particular that can be noted in the celebrations of the Holy Father. One of the significant aspects is the centrality of the crucifix on the altar, because of the Eucharistic celebration, most of all the prayer and the Eucharistic prayer. In the symbol of the cross, everyone is helped as they direct their eyes, and above all, their hearts, towards this center, the Lord, as he renews his sacrifice of love for the salvation of all. And then the other aspect is adoration. The Pope repeats often that the liturgy is the greatest act of adoration in the Church. It's clear that, as such, many little things, little symbols, must contribute to this. I think of kneeling for communion when a person receives communion. I think of the moments of silence during the liturgical celebration. I think also of the attention to everything that makes up the rite, so that it upholds the truth for all who participate in experiencing the figure of God and taking on the attitude of being in prayer. These are some of the things that can help us to understand how the Pope celebrates Mass.
At Christmas and New Year's, like all the major papal celebrations and trips, he's right there with him every step of the way. And this year will be no different.
The celebration of Christmas brings with it a time of preparation, a vigil celebration in which the Pope isn't always present, but where the faithful visiting St. Peter's are involved. It has an exquisite tone. There are hymns, and this helps everyone to enter into the atmosphere of the great solemnity of Christmas. And this concludes with the singing of the Kalinda, an ancient text that was recently brought back that summarizes the history that leads to the birth of the Lord. After the singing of the Kalinda, the Holy Father enters for Midnight Mass. For the last few years, this Mass in particular has included the participation of children, also in the offertory. It is the children who place the statue of the child Jesus in the Nativity Scene at the end Mass, where the Holy Father goes and blesses the statue with incense.
Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
A unique school exists amid the ancient buildings of Rome. It's where the Pope's youngest choir members are trained. Here, children from 8 to 14 years old become part of the Sistine Chapel Choir.
La Cappella Musicale Pontificia è un ente.
The Pontifical Sistine Chapel Choir is part of the Vatican that has the function of presenting the choir of the Holy Father. It is formed of adults and children that provide the four voices. The adults are the bass and tenors, while the kids are the altos and sopranos.
There are just 12 in each grade level, chosen from at least 800 children who take part in the audition process. They go to regular lessons just like other students. The curriculum is almost exactly the same, except for the more than 2 hours of music and singing classes per day. These are the youngest members, just months into their first year. They're already looking forward to putting their education to use.
Bello, molto interessante, ti fa sentire che devi metterci grinta per cantare.
Stacca. Lascia, più piano. Lascia. La più piano, riprende.
A Natale festeggio e poi penso che i prossimi anni andremo a cantare per il Papa. I prossimi anni a Natale, a me mi hanno detto così.
Accento, lascia. Stacca. Lascia.
Significa andare a cantare per una persona molto brava che vuole bene a molte persone e non per l'aspetto che c'hanno fuori, ma per l'aspetto che hanno anche dentro di loro.
Meanwhile, their elders are already singing for Pope Benedict XVI. In December alone, they were with him at the Spanish Steps when he visited Our Lady on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. They were also there when he announced his coming trip to Mexico and Cuba. And they'll be with him throughout the Christmas season as well.
The choir will be mainly singing for the acts of the Pope. So the December 24th Mass for Christmas Eve, on Christmas Day, on the 31st of December for the Te Deum, on New Year's, then the 6th of January for the Epiphany, but then also the 15th for baptisms in the Sistine Chapel.
And among their repertoire this Christmas is this Italian classic.